New year, fresh start, time to recreate myself. What will I find when I walk down this path? New friends, new goals, new challenges to be met. I will meet them and I am going to succeed. New year, fresh start, it's time for self-discovery.
Episode 11. Foxtail. For a long moment, Noah just sat on the couch. A wild sense of hollowness drifted in him, and he shivered ever so slightly. Noah had only told one other creature, that being Samuel, about the events that led to his exile and abandonment of his home. Issa and Doma watched him with rapt attention, and neither of them broke the silence that lingered about. Noah stopped his story. Samuel averted his gaze, but he flicked his tail against the couch with a slight, uneasy excitement.
So, what happened to the Radiant Council?
I don't know for sure. The last things I saw were the glass breaking and the contents inside spilling out like luminescent milk.
Issa crossed her arms over her chest.
No wonder you went into hiding. Not only did you betray your people, albeit for a good reason, but you might have single-handedly devastated the Vernot civilization.
Yeah.
He gently reached for the key hanging around his neck and caressed it between his shirt and fingers.
I'm not certain if Vernot is still looking for me, but it's important that they don't find me. Aside from being a traitor, there are other reasons for which they might still be searching. I'd rather not go into those details, though. I hope you two understand.
Sure.
So where did the bead take you?
Well, I appeared on an island in the middle of a great sea. There were all of these great ruins on the island, and there were also these local farmers there too. They thought I was one of their long-lost, forgotten gods. And they honored me with a place to stay and plenty of information.
Which island?
Shreet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the surrounding culture or not.
Issa flourished her hands through her hair.
Yes. Our family originated from there, actually. The Montebello ancestral home is close to the island of Shreet.
Ah, what a small world this is. Anyway, after I learned the local languages of the area, I started out traveling all over your world. I must have done that for, maybe about 80 years?
80 years? Wow, that's a long time. How long is the average angel lifespan anyway?
I think the average lifespan for my people are around 400 to 500 years. Archangels live twice as long since we're infused with even more potent magical power.
Wow. So you're kind of an old man.
Yeah, kind of. Over my many travels, I've encountered and learned about so many different cultures and learned so many languages. Still, it was a lonely journey.
Don't you only speak like 14 languages or so? I think that's what Ms. Vadhai said.
14. Maybe like 1,400. This guy can communicate with anyone. Hell, this motherfucker even speaks Click.
Issa's eyes sparkled with a hint of dark rage, but Doma giggled.
To be fair, I have magical spells in place to help me learn and remember most of them.
Noah gestured to a small golden stud that was in his lower left earlobe.
The 14 I'm most proficient in were the ones that I mentioned in my application, so it wasn't really a lie.
So, I have another question. How did you meet Samuel?
The fox grinned, stood up on Doma's lap, and stretched for a moment.
I was wondering when we'd get to this part. Rest your gums, feather boy. I'll take it from here. I hate when you tell the story of how we met. You always make me sound like a punk-ass bitch.
Noah opened his mouth to retort, but a laugh trickled out. He merely crossed his arms over his chest, nodded toward the now more spry fox, and then sat back in his seat. Samuel eyed them all, and then grinned. It was a clear-ass night, the kind of night where a man could really feel alive. Samuel took in a deep breath as he stepped into the clearing, past the thick cluster of trees and bushes. The crisp moonlight bathed the entire clearing in soft light, and Samuel cast a quick glance over himself. Damn, he was sexy. He stood over 6 feet tall, had dark chocolate-colored skin, and the best, sharpest attire that any man...
Excuse me, I have a question. Is the Samuel from the story you? Or another Samuel? 'Cause it sounds like you're talking about a person, and you're, a fox.
Samuel gave her a flat look that only lasted a brief moment.
Kitsune are shapeshifters. We can take human form. Now, where was I?
He stood over 6 feet tall, had dark chocolate-colored skin, and the best, sharpest attire that any man in the land could have. In fact, most people were incredibly jealous of how stylish he was. All of the ladies threw themselves at him, and all the men wanted to be him. Yeah, Samuel was a sexy, sexy motherfucker. On this particular night, he wore a vibrant purple silk robe that had several bright yellow butterflies flapping their happy way on his back. His head was shaved bald, and his smooth skin shimmered in the moonlight. A well-groomed handlebar mustache outlined the shape of his large, full lips. Samuel's brown eyes sparkled with intention, and yet the object of his desire still remained concealed from him.
Where are you, you delicious little vixen?
The irony tickled his senses, but human women liked being called cutesy animal pet names and shit. He didn't quite understand it, but if it secured another warm body in his bed tonight, Samuel would tell a woman the secrets of the moon itself.
Over here, you sexy-ass fox.
That should have been a warning, but Samuel was too drunk on his own badassness to notice. In addition to the exceptional and well-deserved sense of confidence, a savage lust roared within him. The air tingled with a kind of primal anticipation, and Samuel smelled the pheromones wafting off of the hidden woman. Oh yeah, she wanted it. She hungered for his massive Samuel paused for a moment. Doma's eyes were quite large, and she pressed her lips together in a kind of shocked wonder. Issa, on the other hand, had lava-like irises, a tight frown under her nose, and a barely noticeable aura of energy tingling around her. Massive compassion, as Samuel always treated his women with the utmost respect. A voluptuous woman stepped out from behind a tree. She had a full body with a round face, scintillating curves, and a plunging neckline that made Samuel's blood boil. However, when he got within 60 feet of the woman, a sudden spark flared in his mind. Samuel stopped, and his smile fell away, leaving only a stone-cold seriousness that usually unsettled even gods.
I didn't know this was gonna be a group thing.
He took a slight step back and then planted himself comfortably in the tall grass. The wind blew all around him, and the pungent odor of greed and malice filled his nostrils. Still, the woman, whose name was Gaiji, grinned all the more. She stepped out into the open, as did her 20 associates.
Wait, 20? When you told me this story before, there were only 10.
Motherfucker, did I interrupt you when you were talking? Obviously you misheard me, 'cause there were 20.
Obviously I did.
Now shut the fuck up, will you? No respect.
20 men with brooding, haggard faces gave hungry stares at Samuel. But Samuel's eyes were locked on Gaiji.
I'm not into men. Your friends are gonna have to go.
Oh, but they're just as interested in you as I am, my dear Samuel. After all, it's not often that we have a kitsune in our midst.
A what?
Samuel's smile didn't reflect the twisted seriousness enveloping his insides. It wasn't fear, because Samuel didn't fear any motherfucker, aside from his mama.
Look, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Gaiaji's eyes became even more crazy, like an addict who could smell the object of their self-imposed insanity.
Oh, but you do. I know what you are. And there's an old lady who will pay top gold for you. My friends are gonna make sure you come along with me, one way or another.
Samuel's hands burst into blue flames, and the illumination from the fire sent dancing slivers in his eyes. Doma raised her hand, but Samuel said,
Kitsune can also summon blue fire from our souls.
The young girl grinned widely and then started scratching Samuel behind the ears again. For a brief moment, the 20 goons just sat in amazement, probably because they were a bunch of slack-jawed, never been outside of their village before, eating rat meat kind of motherfuckers. And magic, real magic, was something these bitches only dreamed about in the depths of the night. Their stupor didn't last long as Samuel pointed his palm at 2 of the dumbass henchmen. Up till that point, aside from the muted sounds of their chatter, the night had been pretty quiet. All that changed once a pair of people became living azure torches. The grass caught flame too as the unfortunate thugs ran away, waving their arms about as if that would actually help. To be honest, their skin didn't burn. They only thought it did. Samuel grinned to himself, for the blue fire that he had conjured hadn't been real, but it was a part of another magical gift afforded to fine-ass foxes like himself. That particular gift was illusion magic. The illusion of the blue fire had been enough to give the rest of the thugs a moment of utter shock, and that's all Samuel needed. He leapt forward and punched one of the frozen motherfuckers right in the nose. The sweet-ass feeling of the man's facial bones collapsing under Samuel's great strength caused a sweet rush of adrenaline to run through him. At that moment, the 17 remaining assholes started moving toward him, but Samuel easily danced around their weapons, hands, and feet. As he swirled around them, Samuel gave savage kicks, punches, and even threw motherfuckers into their friends. The more he owned these greedy, stupid-ass humans, the wider his smile grew. He snapped his fingers, and a trio of illusions that looked just like him appeared. They were identical to him, although he was still the sexiest of the group. Some of the thugs went after the fake versions of himself, but they continued to fail to capture their targets. One by one, each of the thugs fell to his hard blows. When the last fugly-ass motherfucker fell to the ground, Samuel stood over him and raised his clenched fist into the air.
How do you like that, motherfucker?
A savage blast of electricity slammed into his back, and Samuel's body rocked wildly. He fell to the ground on top of the very men he had pummeled. Groggily, he glanced up at Gaiji, who had a single rubber rod in her hand. The rubber rod had an exposed metal tip, and every second a small spark of electricity zapped off of it.
The master said this would help bring you down, Samuel. Once I bring you in, she said she would give me a lifetime supply of opium. I hope you understand this isn't personal.
She pointed the rod at Samuel. He reached for her.
No!
The electricity hit him again. Everything went black. The next time he opened his eyes, everything felt off. For starters, he laid down in a fairly large cage. Hay had been scattered among the bottom. Samuel hated hay. His skin wasn't dark chocolate colored anymore, but his usual fox fur was in its place. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words refused to come out. Samuel's eyes widened, and he tried to yell out. He tried to call out for help. He tried to curse. Nothing.
Wow, I bet that was the absolute worst, huh?
You have no fucking idea.
An old woman, perhaps no taller than 4 feet tall, moved closer to the cage, and she was dressed in a dingy moth-eaten dress. Old, faded makeup had been painted on her face long ago, but it had never been removed. Her eyes reflected a pair of dark coal irises, for they were rough, dirty, and unpleasant to look at. The skin drooped from the woman's face, and it sagged in chunks. She wore a kind of headscarf that had once perhaps been colorful. Now it was faded and dull. When she smiled, her teeth were the color of swamp water. She walked with a gnarled cane. Samuel opened his mouth, but only a fox bark came out. The woman laughed.
I bet you're wondering who I am, aren't you? Child of the fox goddess.
The fox merely glared at her, and the old woman pointed a bony finger. Each of her fingernails had been sharpened to deadly points.
Look upon the face of your betrayer, little fox.
The lighting was dim, but Samuel still made out Gaiji's shape. She was slumped in a chair. Her eyes were closed, and even in the poor illumination, Samuel knew she would never open her eyes again.
A lifetime supply indeed.
The old woman howled, and her laughter reminded Samuel of large rocks slamming together over and over. She turned back to him.
So, would you like to know who I am?
Once more, the swamp teeth greeted him.
I have existed for longer than human intellect can understand, though not so old as your mother. I have always dwelled within the confines of this.
She flourished around her. Samuel's cage sat in a large kind of tent. Junk piles surrounded him on all sides, with the exception of the chair that served as Gaiji's grave, a small clearing just before the cage, and a small path through the mountains of stuff.
I have not had a good act for 140 years, and so I have withered. But you will change that.
Samuel barked out, although his mind said,
"Fuck you, you old bitch. I'm not doing anything."
The old woman gestured to her own neck.
You are wearing a special magic collar that blocks you from your Kusuni magic, unless I want you to do something. And it will prevent your kind, even your mother, from finding you. You are mine. And you will do as I say, or you will starve and wither just like me.
Samuel continued to glare.
Sleep well, my little fox.
The old woman started to move away.
Tomorrow we will rebuild this circus, and I will gain my beauty again.
With that, the strange woman left Samuel all alone. It was dark and quiet. Very quiet. When the fox tried to speak out again, he was once more silenced. His mind buzzed with the foulest of words, if for nothing else but to accentuate his growing terror and despair. Before that night, Samuel had been the manliest, sexiest, and toughest kitsune ever. And yet, he couldn't help but sob. His words were locked in the depths of his mind, and all he could do was produce little yips. For 100 years, that strange bitch controlled Samuel. She forced him to perform tricks, be silly, and let strangers pet him. Often, the strangers pet him too hard or dug their nails into his hide. Oh, how he wanted to curse them out, or even just bite them. But his master, who went by the name Madame Goosh, ensured that he was obedient and passive. She controlled his actions, but she couldn't dominate his mind or the fire in his eyes. With each passing year, another small needle of pain and spiritual atrophy stabbed Samuel. If he just let go, then everything he was would slip away into nothingness, and he would be a husk. Fuck that shit. Samuel never let go. Not for 100 years. Deep in his heart, he knew one day he would be free. Surely his vile captor would make a mistake eventually. That day eventually came on a fateful autumn afternoon. Like nearly every other performance, Madame Goosh opened the show with a grand speech and a flourishing series of tricks. At the beginning of his time with her, the show catered to country bumpkins who had their poverties only outweighed by their own superstitions. However, over the last century, larger and more affluent crowds had come to see the marvels of Madame Goosh's splendid circus. With the increase in praise, the vile woman became more beautiful, youthful, and powerful. Other performers had been conned or recruited into joining the show, but none of them ever interacted with Samuel. Madame Goosh never let them, and threatened immediate termination if they did. 35 years after he was captured, a pair of performers tried to free him. Well, Madame Goosh found them in the middle of the attempt. She terminated them immediately by biting off their heads. Of course, she told the rest of the circus they had just decided to leave, but Samuel knew the truth. Just like every other night, Samuel waltzed into the center ring of the circus. He glanced over the crowd, who stared in disbelief at the claim that he was a magical fox. Most nights, the people all had the same expressions: anticipation, curiosity, and excitement. It made sense, since Samuel was one pretty badass motherfucker, but still, nearly everyone who came to the show beamed delighted expressions at him. That night, however, one particular guy didn't. Samuel passed a glance over him, but then looked back when his mind registered what he saw. The man stood at the entrance of the circus beside one of the bleachers. Had the motherfucker just been standing there the entire show? The guy was about average height, short black hair, and a thick black mustache that covered the top of his upper lip. It looked kind of gangly and totally out of style compared to anyone else in the audience. His clothes were plain and unassuming, which appeared jarring against the bright colors of the rest of the locals who had come to the show. The man looked off.
Wait. Is he talking about you? You used to have a mustache? Ew!
I know, right? That was the second thing I made sure he changed once we started hanging out. You're welcome.
I think you did the world a favor.
Whatever, it wasn't even that bad. Can we just continue on with the story, please?
The man frowned at Samuel, but it wasn't the kind of aggressive sourness that comes with zealots who hate magical creatures. A soft shimmering reflected in his eyes, and the man kept wincing the longer that he and Samuel gazed at one another. What the fuck was this guy looking at with those pitiful eyes? Fuck him. Samuel didn't need that kind of shit from anyone, especially from some goofy-ass looking weirdo who didn't know how to dress, who probably was homeless and couldn't cook a decent pot of chili to save his life.
Seriously, man?
After a brief moment, Samuel moved his attention elsewhere. Before he had time to glance back at the strange fellow again, Madame Goosh commanded that he start his first dazzling trick, just as she had ordered him to do 1,000 times before. Samuel conjured several balls of blue fire in his mouth and bounced them on his tail. The crowd gasped as the balls twisted through the air and zipped around one another. Next, Samuel conjured an illusion of a purple fog, and he filled the center of the circus ring with it. He was obscured, and he took the form of a massive ox. More than a few children squealed in delight as the shadowy images of his temporary form danced within the confines of the fog. Samuel went from an ox to a horse, to a man, to a hawk, and finally a dragon. Someone screamed, but more than a few others cheered. At Madame Goosh's request, Samuel dissipated the fog and revealed his normal foxy self. At the end of the trick, he noticed the strange man was gone. The rest of the show went by without anything out of the ordinary happening. And just like the thousands and thousands of nights that came before it, Samuel found himself locked away in his cage, in the dark of his own secluded tent. Sometime after midnight, a new fragrance filled Samuel's nostrils. He immediately hopped to his feet and glared at the source. The strange man who pitied him earlier stood in front of his cage. Another sad frown creased his face. Samuel glared at him with brilliant, fiery eyes. The man smelled complex, with an assortment of sharp, sweet, and lingering odors all mixed into one. Normal humans had natural scents that related to where they lived, what they ate, and even whether or not they had magical powers. Mages had complex scents too, but no mage, not even Madame Goosh, had such uniqueness as this man did.
You poor thing. You're not here by choice, are you?
Of course he wasn't. Samuel snarled a little and whipped his tail around wildly. Whoever this guy was, he was going to die as soon as Madame Goosh realized he was trespassing. Somehow she knew about the other two, even though they were careful. Samuel gave out a few small yips, urging the man to run. Instead of running, the man bent down and gave the fox a peculiar, studious glance.
That's a nasty little artifact you have there. Would you like me to remove it for you?
Samuel's eyes widened, but before he could react, the slithering voice of the baddest bitch in the circus cut him off.
You will die before you have the chance.
Madame Goosh stood by the entrance of the tent. and the moonlight flowed in behind her. The man didn't look back at her, and he smiled at Samuel. And then his hand soared through the bars of the cage quicker than Samuel could follow. As soon as the man's fingertip touched the collar around Samuel's neck, he said,
Artifact break.
Metal crackled, and a massive wave of arcane energy struck Samuel all at once. The blast was so powerful that he blacked out for a few long moments. His muscles ached, and then he rejoiced. Samuel's mind fizzled, and then surged forward like a candle bursting to life. Every strand of fur stood up wildly. Slowly, Samuel opened his eyes, and he slowly pushed himself up off the floor of his cage. The sound of intense combat irked him slightly, and he glanced up at the two people fighting. It wasn't like a bar fight or a simple fist fight. No, it was so much more. Madame Goosh's fingernails were long, jagged claws, and her 30-inch tongue whipped about trying to snag the throat of the man. Her eyes were black pools of nothingness, and her limbs were elongated. She screeched as she tried to rend the man. The man had a silver spear in his hand, and he whirled about, easily dodging the attacks of the horrid Madame Goosh. No matter how hard she tried, she just couldn't land a blow. The man, on the other hand, stabbed at her many times.
How dare you try and steal from me? I'll kill you and swallow your soul.
Creatures far more powerful than you have tried.
She dove at him again, but the man kept weaving away at the last moment. The spear plunged into her heart, and yet she still moved about.
You're resilient. I'll give you that.
You can't kill me. My circus gives me power. It makes me immortal.
Samuel rolled his shoulders back as he moved through the bars of the cage. A savage flame ignited within him, and he opened his mouth to speak.
Motherfucking bitch.
Sweet ecstasy zapped at his senses.
Fucking stupid greedy ass.
He breathed heavy as his entire body became bathed in blue flame.
Old ass, always looking like you ate an entire roasted chicken by yourself without sharing any type bitch.
The fire burned hotter. In truth, it had only taken a couple of years to create a plan for how he would beat the terrible and cruel Madame Goosh. Up till now, he had never had the opportunity to enact his plan. Both Madame Goosh and the man stopped and stared at Samuel.
No! What are you doing?
Samuel smiled and sent a stream of fire at the metal bars around him.
Fuck you!
The metal bars melted and Samuel pounced out.
Hey, the weird motherfucker. Keep the bitch busy while I burn this whole fucking place down.
Madame Goosh's eyes widened.
I'll skin you alive, you wretch.
A dozen silver chains plunged out of the ground and shackled her in place. She screamed out loud again. Samuel dashed outside and sprinted toward where the larger of the tents were still erected.
Listen up. Unless you want to burn to death, I suggest you motherfuckers run.
With reckless abandon, Samuel sent cones of azure fire into buildings and wagons. People ran out of some tents, wailing. Some of the performers were on fire, but Samuel couldn't find the urge to care. In the span of 100 years, only 2 other people ever tried to help him. If these motherfuckers burned, then they burned. Over the hustle and bustle of panicked circus performers and blazing fire, the roar of an enraged witch, or whatever that unnatural bitch was, thundered loudly. The performers ran off into the night, leaving only the ashes and flaming remains of what used to be. Samuel stood in the center, and he gazed at his handiwork. The strange man from before approached him, spear still in hand.
Are you all right?
Fuck yeah, I am. What happened to that spooky-ass bitch?
The man gaped at him for a moment.
Spooky ass. Wow, you're really foul-mouthed.
If you don't like it, you can suck on my fox balls. No offense. I've not been foul-mouthed for 100 goddamn years. And I'm long overdue to let it all out. Fuck, shit, motherfucker, fuck again, damn it. It feels so good. It feels so fucking good.
Samuel laughed, and then the man laughed a little too.
So, tell me what happened to the bitch.
Oh, right. It was weird. She kind of collapsed into dust. What was she?
Fuck if I know.
A sudden foul wind cascaded around the pair of them, and a sickly-ass voice rasped all around the fox.
Damn you, Kisune. I will skin you the next time we meet, mark my words.
Samuel just looked around the air.
Damn! How do I kill your spooky ass?
You can't kill me. Once I rebuild my circus, I will find you.
Good luck with that bitch.
Samuel padded over to the stranger.
All right, listen up, fucker. Since you saved me and all, I'm gonna stick with you for a while.
The man smiled and allowed the spear to fade into nothingness.
I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm kinda on the run and thus keeping a low profile. I hate to get you mixed up in my troubles.
I don't give a shit about that. Let's get out of here and leave this spooky bitch to her embers.
As they walked away, the wind howled obscenities and threats at them, although only until the edge of the burning wreckage of the tents. Once they were far away, Samuel peered at the man.
So, what's your name, weirdo?
Weirdo?
Yeah, that mustache is so scruffy, you look like an animal. And that's saying something since I'm more animalistic than you should be. So, what's your name?
My name is Notada Chadis.
What? Nah, man, fuck that. I'm gonna call you Noah. That's a more normal name than whatever bullshit you just said.
You can't just change my name like that.
Sure I can. Second thing, shave that motherfucking creature you have under your nose. If you're trying to lay low, then you're doing it wrong. Also, you can't show up to my house with that poor groom thing. My mother will ridicule you even more than what I'm doing now.
Your house? Your mother? What are you even talking about?
Think about it, motherfucker. It's been 100 years since I've been home. There's no way my mother's gonna believe that I've been captured for a century. So you're gonna have to back my story up. After that, we can go wherever you want to go.
I don't have a choice, do I?
Samuel just laughed.
And that's how we started palling around.
So wait, what happened when you got back to your mom's house?
Issa stood up and beamed a wily smile at her little sister. She drifted around the table and then placed a hand on her shoulder.
It's getting kinda late, and you're still getting used to being so active, so how about we save that story for another time?
But I want to know what happened when...
Samuel leaned over and nuzzled her arm.
It's cool. I'll tell you about it when you come over the next time.
You promise?
The fox simply nodded. Issa and Doma moved toward the door, and a sudden gritty silence swirled around the apartment. Needles of tension stabbed into Noah's skin, and he walked just a step behind Issa. Issa's lower lip quivered a little, and she held her hands to her chest, right in the center. When she got to the door, she stopped and whirled around to face Noah. Her eyes radiated with a strong sense of urgency.
So, listen.
Here it comes. I was actually waiting for this ever since she walked in.
A sudden hard glare covered Issa's face, and she sent the full brunt of the look toward the fox.
Waiting for what?
As you know, Doma wasn't the only one who was affected by the Montebello curse. Now that I know you're an archangel, it makes sense that the potion was so powerful. While I was making the potion, I realized something about it.
Oh?
I'm pretty sure that with some experimentation, I could synthesize a cure and immunization for my whole family. However, in order to do that experimentation...
You'd need more components. Specifically, blood and feathers.
I know it's asking for a lot, and I know you're trying to stay hidden, but... I know if I can...
Sure.
Really?
Knowing this bleeding heart motherfucker, he probably already made the decision to help if you asked. Even before he gave you the first vial and feather.
Noah just laughed without confirming or denying Samuel's comment. Issa hugged Noah in a tight embrace, and beads of moisture dripped onto his shoulder. Noah couldn't help but take in her fragrance. Issa had definitely been wearing perfume of some kind.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Issa stepped back, but then she touched his arm with her hands.
You can't know what this means to me.
A slight rosy hue had covered Issa's cheeks, and they became even more noticeable when Noah and Issa looked at Doma. Doma had a completely crimson face, and she watched the both of them with wide, excited eyes. A wide grin sat on the fox's face. Issa cleared her throat and then stopped touching Noah altogether.
Okay, so you were going to go?
She opened the door, ushered Doma out, and then closed the door behind her. Noah chuckled and then moved to open the door, but Issa opened it back. Her face was even redder.
We'll touch base about things later. Good night, Noah. Or should I call you Marzo?
Noah is fine. Good night.
Issa closed the door, leaving Noah alone with his roommate. When Noah locked eye contact with the fox, Samuel nodded vigorously.
Oh, yeah. Tap that ass.
Shut up.
Noah grinned as he moved to his bedroom and closed the door behind him.
I better not hear that goddamn bed squeaking.
Dude, shut the fuck up!
Samuel howled with laughter.